So this is Bob. We'll wait a few more minutes while people join. Evelyn, are you on? Okay. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Bob.
Okay. That's Bob.
I see EMI advisors, but I think that's usually Sarah. I don't see Evelyn on yet.
That's okay. Just wanted to make sure I wasn't talking to an empty mic.
No, we're here.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing anybody else join. I don't see Evelyn on either. So I guess I'll kick this off. Let's see. I've had a bit of a bandwidth issue. I'm not going to share video of me. I think most of you can handle not seeing me. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining this particular webinar. We, at the request of the EC and the FAC, decided to hold two webinars, one on introduction to FHIR. We did that earlier this week, reasonably well attended. And then we were going to do one as an orientation to the SDOH FHIR implementation guide, which is what we're doing on the call today. So what we're going to do is actually go through things that are available out on the internet, the real tooling, et cetera. I did not create a PowerPoint for this. It makes a lot more sense for us to be able to go through the real artifacts. One thing I'd like to do differently today than we did earlier this week is feel free at any point to ask a question. This is not intended to be purely didactic. I will also pause periodically and solicit questions. So the goal is to make sure you understand what we're creating on the technology track and understand how it intersects with the work that's being done in terminology, and also understand how this actually goes and sets the stage for solving some of the interoperability problems that we have in the areas around connecting healthcare and social risk environments. Okay, I'm going to start by reminding people what we have been doing. This is actually a deck. Whoops, this is the wrong deck. Get the right one. There we go. This is the one from our Connectathon. We just went through that this week. We spent 2 days holding a FHIR Connectathon, or participating in a FHIR Connectathon. managing a social determinants of health exchange track. It was well attended. We had roughly 26 people at the beginning of the first day and 20 at the beginning of the second day. We asked for feedback from everyone participating the first day, for those that attended in the morning of the second, and it was uniformly positive that they were all happy with the reference implementation, with the presentations, with the direction that we're taking. Unfortunately, there weren't too many of them that brought code to the table to be able to actually test interoperability. We're hoping that some of that will get rectified as we go into the CMS Connectathon. So to remind people what we have done is we balloted an implementation guide that we'll walk through. And that implementation guide covers support for assessments, health concerns or problems, goals, interventions or referrals, managing consent, at least within a small scope, we'll talk about that, and some aggregation for exchange or reporting. It intersects with the vocabulary work in a number of places. The assessment surveys are LOINC coded. The health concerns and problems are either ICD-10, CM, or SNOMED CT coded, or both. Goals are LOINC and SNOMED CT. Interventions or referrals and the procedures that document what was done are coded with SNOMED CT, CPT, and HCPCS. And then we show quality measures here as outcomes. We work with NCQA on their quality measures, and most of those are LOINC coded. So we wind up using these vocabularies or terminologies, code systems as we call them in FHIR, to establish the semantics of what we're exchanging. FHIR is the actual syntax. And then we have a consent resource and aggregation, as we talked about. We've gone through this multiple times. We have a process by which we can take a LOINC-coded survey, convert it into a FHIR questionnaire, SDC questionnaire, administer that questionnaire, and create specific FHIR resources. And we'll show you those in the implementation guide. The questionnaire response, the observation, each question and answer pair is an observation. If you have more than one answer to it, then it's also within that observation. And then condition resources where they're appropriate to document health concerns that come out of administering the particular assessment. As we have responded to feedback from from both of our groups, the Executive Committee and the Strategic Advisory Committee, in asking why we were focused on provider to community, which was the initial scope of the implementation guide set back about a year and a half ago. What we did was we expanded that scope, what would be called the normative portion of the guide, the actual definition of the things we exchange, supported that expansion. So it was really about workflow to support providers, payers, coordination platforms, community-based organizations, as well as our intent to support both patients and caregivers. I'm sorry, was somebody asking a question? Okay. This is more of a spaghetti drawing showing all the interactions, providers talking to providers, providers talking to payers, either one of them talking to coordination platforms, et cetera. All the blue lines are interactions that we are supporting. The orange lines, some cases they will be supported, but they're not supported necessarily using FHIR. Okay, they may be supported through other methods. We've gone over this about exchanging a consent resource. We are focused on one and only one aspect of exchanging consent in this particular version of the implementation guide. We're focused on collecting consent information, whether that's with the payer or with the provider or with a community platform, and being able to document it and use that consent as the basis on which we exchange information, in particular from a HIPAA environment to a non-HIPAA covered environment. But the one place we're actually specifying the exchange of what's called a consent resource the FHIR resource that goes and exchanges the consent information itself, is when you're exchanging between a covered entity and a business associate, and the business associate is going to be releasing information to a community-based organization that's not covered by this associate agreement and is not a covered entity. And in that case, what we're doing is we're saying, fine, we've collected the consent of the patient to go and release the information. We're giving you that documentation as a business associate. So when you release it, you have the documentation for your records that that's allowed. This is just where we are in the process. We just finished a Connectathon. We're here. We're taking feedback from the Connectathon and starting to incorporate it. We're updating user stories. We're getting ready for final publication of the STU1 implementation guide, submitting it for publication by the end of June. And we will be preparing for the CMS Connectathon. They're holding one July 20th through the 22nd virtually. And at that point, we will try to make sure that we focus on truly a Connectathon. We're going to ask people to bring code to the table, test interactions. We have the reference implementation up and running and available, and we'll be able to go and test the exchanges that the implementation guide documents. I'm going to stop here for 1 second and ask if anybody has questions regarding the scope of what we're doing with the FHIR implementation guide. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. So what we're going to do next is we are going to take a look at the implementation guide itself. This is the version of the guide that is in what's called the continuous build. It is not the balloted version. It's what we're working on right now. It's what's being updated and will eventually go to publication. If you want to see the versions that are out there, you can click on Directory of Published Versions. And the version we balloted is available. You can click on that. That's the 0.1.0 version. And you can, and this will be persisted indefinitely. Okay, balloted versions are persisted, as are published versions. So you can always go back to them and look at them. One of the things we'll talk about today is quality checks on versions. This is meeting the FHIR standard and the publication standard. When you're in the implementation guide itself, at the very bottom, there's something called the QA report. You can click on the QA report and you can see where we are. Okay, so basically everything is okay from a publisher point of view. There were a grand total of 7 errors. Those errors are ones that we cannot fix. They're things that occur because of relationships, for example, to structured data capture that were unresolvable. This is not a problem that we can fix in our implementation guide. So they were fine in putting this through the publication. By the way, before you, the ballot. Before you can go to ballot or before you can go to publication, the standard is you have to resolve all errors and all warnings. Now, warnings aren't necessarily resolvable. They may be a warning that here's something you might want to have considered doing, or the standard says you should do it, but you're not required to do it, in which case we do something called suppressing them. So we have 36 different suppressed errors or warnings that we've basically gone through and reviewed one by one and said, yep, we're doing it intentionally, the warning's fine, but it doesn't apply to what we're doing here. And so this is also part of the formal process, suppressing warnings. So our goal ultimately, before we go to ballot or publication, is to get the number of errors, the number of warnings, and candidly the number of hints to 0. And this covers all of the various aspects of the implementation guide as it goes through the FHIR publisher, which is how we take the code going into an implementation guide and turn it into what you're seeing here. Okay, let's see if I can get back to where I was. And that's why do you not want to go backward? There we go. Okay, so this is the 1.1 build. What we have in here are most of the ballot comments included, the ones that had to do with primarily the normative resources, the resource definitions. We talked about those earlier this week. The profiles, we talked about those earlier this week. The documentation on how they work, meaning cardinality, et cetera. Those have been updated for the Connectathon. The leading material, the documentation associated with it has not been updated. We're still going through making revisions, and that'll be updated over the next couple of weeks. So what we'll do, and since I mentioned, let's see if I can do this. It's blocking my view at the top here, sorry. I don't know if I can move this off the screen. I cannot. Okay. Yeah, there it goes. Okay. Whoop. If I go over here, it should move up. Try it one more time. Okay. This is something called Jura. What Jura does for HL7 is it collects feedback on pretty much everything. Ballots, informative documents. We use it to go and provide feedback on things that the working groups are doing. But in particular, we worry about it for the projects that are called FHIR specifications. Okay, so we also provide feedback on business issues and software, et cetera. This is a list of the ballot comments that were addressed in what's called block vote 1. We go through and we address the ballot comments, then we assemble them into a vote. We take them back to the working group and we vote them. If we look at one of these, let's say, for example, there's a comment here on adjusting must support over time, for example. This is what they look like. There's a description of the issue. There's a proposal usually on what they'd like to see done. There is a resolution description, and then there's actually something that how we resolve it. We call it the persuasive with mod. In other words, we agree with you, but we're going to change the resolution a little bit from what you suggested. So these are the things that we go through. We had 227 of these for the implementation guide, the social determinants of health FHIR implementation guide. There has been some question about the number of comments. I thought I would bring back and show you an example of all of the Da Vinci implementation guides that have gone through Ballot the last year and the number of comments they had. Coverage requirements discovery had about 270. Documentation templates and rules right around 200. Prior authorization support, 260. This is a payer coverage decision exchange. That was a relatively small number, but there were a relatively small number of people interested. Alerts, 210. Clinical data exchange, almost 400. So the number we had was not unusual at all. In fact, given the scope of the guide, it's quite reasonable to expect that number of comments. I just wanted to do this because I've heard more than one person say, gee, isn't that a lot? And the answer is no. Actually, it means that people have looked at it and they provided intelligent feedback that we can incorporate. Okay, let's see if I can get back to where we were. All right. One other thing we'll do right now is we'll talk about something called Trifolia. Trifolia is a implementation guide development environment created by Lantana. We use that as our tooling to build the implementation guide. So what it does, it allows us to go and see things a little differently. We can see the implementation guide. We can actually build it through the publisher and have it available and test it out inside of effectively Trifolia without pushing it out to the public build. And we do this as we're testing things and making sure that the updates we're doing work. We have the ability to go through and edit the implementation guide, any aspect of it. So this is kind of the overall things like the name of the guide, the version of the guide, et cetera. These are narrative pages that are going in the guide. We'll talk about them. These are the various resources that we are including in the guide. These are FHIR resources. We talked about them on Tuesday. These resources here all have profiles. Those are the profiles that constrain them. We talked about what a profile is. And then there's other information that's relative to creating an implementation guide. So this is our development environment. We can edit profiles and extensions. We can edit what are called capability statements. In other words, telling the FHIR environment what this implementation guide is capable of doing. Operation definitions, to the extent that we define an endpoint operation, which we haven't here. An operation we talked about on Tuesday can be complex logic that goes and takes FHIR exchange and processes it. We can define value sets and code systems here, or at least note code systems for inclusion, as well as defining them. We can deal with questionnaires. So these are all things that we have as development tools for us, or capabilities, when we put together the information for an implementation guide. And remember, this all comes out of the basic FHIR specification that we talked about. We went here at the end of the day on Tuesday and said, okay, here's the FHIR specification for release 4. And under this, we have resources, the base resources. We have any profiles that will be published as part of the specification, extensions, operations, terminologies that we looked at that include code systems and value sets. And if we go to resources, for example, here are all the resources that are defined by FHIR R4 that are available for us to use. Now, we use a very small subset of these, the things that are necessary to go and do exchanges. The other thing we probably should do, actually, I'm doing Google. There is something called US Core, which is a set of profiles on top of the base resources that go and instantiate US CDI. So US data, clinical data for exchange. And what they do is they come down here and say, fine, if you're going to go and define, for example, a patient, unless you have a reason that you can't, there's a process we have to go through if we can't, this is the profile you will use. Now, if we just adopt the profile without any changes, we're not going to initially constrain it, or we're not going to change it in any way, then we just reference it. We don't put it in our implementation guide specifically, we just reference to it in the things that we do. So what this does, it adds a number of things. It incorporates things like extensions like race, ethnicity, birth sex. Those are now part of the US Core profile on patient. Now you see here, we just have a standard for using them, not required cardinality 0 to 1. But if we use them, we have to use the standard. We also have some specific identifiers around patients that need to be supported. And remember, the red S means you have to be able to do it. You don't necessarily have to have the data. But if you have the data, then you're supposed to exchange it. So these are things that we adhere to as part of our implementation guide. I'm going to stop here for a moment. Questions regarding anything that I've covered? feel free to ask any questions. If this is complex material, I'm more than happy to explain any portion of it.
Hey, Bob.
Okay.
This is Jim Adamson.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I don't have a question on the material just yet, but you were referencing a gravity project presentation at the beginning of the your presentation. Is that the most current presentation? How would we access that? It looked like that was material I really needed to dig into.
It is posted on the Connectathon track right now. So if you go into Confluence and you there are two ways to it, but if you go into Confluence at the top, there's a search. You can type in Connectathon space 27. It'll take you to the Connectathon 27 page. At the bottom of that page will be a list of all the tracks. One of them will be the gravity SDOH exchange track. Click there and you'll get the material as a hyperlink off that page. We can also post it, and I'll be happy to post it as part of the material for this call, but we tend to post these presentations along with the sessions we're presenting in. Okay?
I follow. Thank you.
Sorry, Bob,
Yep,
this
you're
is
welcome.
Sarah and I were just chatting, Sarah Bahal. We'll actually post, just for everyone in the group today, we will post the recordings from Tuesday's education and today's on our education Confluence page. So we'll have that available so you can access it at a later time.
And we'll include the three PowerPoint presentations, the two PowerPoint presentations, the one from Tuesday and the one from today. We can do that, right, Evelyn?
Yep. Yeah, I was just chatting on how to organize it. So this will be recorded and made available as well. So, and then once they're up, we will send you all communications on how to find it.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions?
This is Courtney from N4A, and I guess this is such highly complicated information and a lot of it. Thoughts, and I guess maybe just putting a thought in your mind, how do we begin to boil this information down for community-based organizations and others that are far away from it but need to understand it in a way that they can digest it? I just put that out there as a great challenge for you.
It's a good question. One thing I need to point out is that FHIR implementation guides are intended for implementers. So if you're going to go and implement these exchange capabilities, some of the material at the front of it is fine for people that are just trying to understand what was done. But the guide itself is designed around somebody who's going to write the code to implement it. So, you know, we're going through some very technical detail here. What we can do is we can look at once we get this guide submitted for publication, excerpting a portion of that and making it available as guidance on the Confluence site. Would that work for you?
I think that would be terrific, and for them to understand how this might impact their data sets and their capacity to integrate, what they may need to do, you know, is that as you take this from FHIR and its implementation, what that then means for the CBO. You know, that bridge over would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. No, good point. Thank you very much. Other comments, questions? Okay. Every implementation guide has a table of contents. Well, first of all, it has a home page. The home page tries to give you an idea of what we're trying to accomplish, okay? So, you know, we're trying to document data in conjunction with encounters. We're trying to document data related. Now, by the way, this has not been updated from the Ballot version. This will be expanded now that we've agreed that we're going to cover payers and cover communication platforms, et cetera, or coordination platforms. So we will be expanding the documentation here, but the overview is what we're trying to accomplish. The content and organization says, here are the very pieces, some background, some context, some specifications, downloads, credits, et cetera, and how you get to them. Now, everything here is duplicated in the table of contents, and some of the things that are here are also duplicated on the red menu bar. So you will see things hyperlinked from multiple places. Don't be surprised. Then we do some update tracking while we're in the process of making updates to a guide. This will go away once we have published, once we're ready for publication. This just goes and says, hi, we're currently on 1.0.0.f, and we just finished doing some things around trying to go and support Prepare as an example. Something wasn't working right. We did a couple of fixes to make it work, and we brought it forward. This is primarily to make this available for the Connectathon.
Quick question. When you say communication platforms, are you talking about the social health referral platforms or others?
Yeah, we're still wrestling with that name. We've had feedback on we call them CBROs, community-based referral organizations. In the slide, we say CPs, examples of CPs are an Aunt Bertha, a Unitas, a NowPow, a 211, and that is not intended to be an exhaustive list. Okay, these are platforms that are there to go and do a number of things, but also to handle referrals to others.
Okay, so, and yes, and this helps clarification for me in terms of the relationship with the CBOs, because know and understand there are a number of CBO networks on the ground that provide information and referral and do referrals to others. So there's already that existing infrastructure, and how do they plug in to this and make sure their systems plug in. So I would say, you know there's a whole nother group that is doing what those communication platforms are doing that are not embedded in this process right now.
Well, they're not, we create these actor designations so that we can demonstrate types of interactions. It doesn't mean it's restricted to only those.
I understand. I guess their capacity on the data side and their systems are different. So just know there may be some significant barriers and challenges there.
And we understand that, but it's a good point that you're making. Thank you. We're focused on FHIR. There will be groups out there that will go in and map FHIR to other things, or we may do it depending upon what the particular standard is. And it's going to evolve over time. We won't see everybody using FHIR today. We won't see everybody using FHIR next year. Hopefully we'll see more and more movement toward it as HHS and ONC and others start to adopt it for communication of information regarding social risk. But there are other things out there, and we realize that will continue to be available and used.
Right. And I think, and I think that bridge, and we can talk offline, how do we begin to communicate and help those folks understand opportunities as well as barriers they may face so that we can bring them along.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay. I think I've only got about 25 minutes. I've got to figure out how to get through this in time and show you a couple other things. So we have a table of contents. It's a hierarchical table of contents. We have the gravity background. We have SDRH clinical care scope. We have personas. This is going to change somewhat in the published version based on ballot comments. This is what was balloted. We have description of survey, instrument support, mapping instructions, support for multiple domains, exchange workflow, technical background, FHIR artifacts. We'll walk through these at a very high level. And then ultimately, and this is all interesting information, but the bottom line is what this does, it defines a series of artifacts, which is actually what you implement. Okay? None of this is directly implementable. This is description of how to do it. It's references to other things. But this is what gets implemented to exchange social determinants of health information using FHIR. And remember, FHIR is an exchange specification. It's how we go and describe the semantics and the structure and the semantics of the information for the sake of exchanging it between two entities. It can be used internally, but very few platforms are built around FHIR internally. Almost all of them have their own native structure, and we use this to exchange data. Much like we did, for example, using HL7v2 to order lab tests, or using HL7v2 to get lab reports back, or to use it to coordinate admissions and discharges. Okay, those things are not inherent internally in the platforms that people use. They're ways we communicate between them. And that's what this is also, a way to communicate. Okay, I'm going to walk through them briefly. Background. Background is just literally information on social determinants of health and the work we're doing at Gravity. Okay. Every page, by the way, when you get to the bottom, will have a link to the next page. So you can go here from either the top menu bar. You'll notice under background, we have the ability to go directly. You can go off the table of contents. That's all hyperlinked. You can go off the home page, or you can go page to page if you wish. So it's really up to you how you navigate. And most things in here, when they reference something else, either within this implementation guide or externally, also have a hyperlink. So you can go there, take a look at what it's referencing, and you can come back to where you left off. One of the advantages of the FHIR environment is we have almost everything hyperlinked, so you can easily answer the questions on, what that reference is about. So we have the scope. Sorry, we're here. We have patient personas. We are updating these. We're adding some additional ones. These are the ones that were balloted. We'll be adding several more and shortening what goes into the implementation guide. And to the extent we're going to include more information, we'll do it as supplemental information on Confluence. We have context. We talk about the survey instrument process. We're elaborating on that. We're talking about mapping instructions. Basically, how do we convert, and this will be elaborated on a bit, how do we convert the output from the assessment or survey to the FHIR resources, the observation, and the condition resource, and that's what we do with the mapping work. We have support for multiple domains. I'm going to take a little branch here. What we have done in this implementation guide is referenced entire code systems. So if we're talking about LOINC, we say LOINC. If we're talking about ICD-10 or Summit CT, we point to ICD-10 or Summit CT. We do not try to, in this framework implementation guide, say, here's the value set for a health concern or food insecurity. We don't do that here. We do that externally to this guide. So we can maintain them externally. We'll be maintaining them ultimately in VSAC. Certain things will be maintained in HL7. But we have a method that we'll be using. We're working with HL7 to make it available now, so that we can say that in the event that this particular instance of a resource, a condition, refers to food insecurity, then the only ICD-10 codes that apply are the following. And we have a method for doing that, or the only Summit codes that apply are the following. But we're putting the how you do it in the guide and the codes themselves externally. And I will show you an example of what we're doing right now, which is a supplemental guide. It's a spreadsheet. We used it for the Connectathon. We'll make it available as part of the reference in the publication. And what it's doing here is it's saying, fine, if you're dealing with food insecurity and you're looking at observations, and in observation, there's something called observation.code. These are all got to enable editing, I believe, to enable hyperlinks. These should all be hyperlinked. There we go. So observation.code has the following valid LOINC codes. So this can be used by an implementer to go and say, fine, in my system, I will restrict it to these codes if you wish to do it. Now, we're recommending the supplement as a should. You should use these, but you're not required to. You can use whatever you need to use for now, because we have a number of assessment tools out there, and we want to communicate information through the implementation guide that may not necessarily conform explicitly to a particular value set that's being created by Gravity. Over time, and with the, shall we say, concurrence of the industry, we'll start to narrow that down to here's the values you should use. And then we can get from an example down to a suggested set, down to an extensible set. In other words, here are the codes you use. If one of these works, you have to use that code. If there's no code there that works, then you can add another code to it. That's where we're going to go over time. But we're not going to get there on this version of the guide, and we probably won't get there on the next version either. Questions? Okay. What else do we have? Exchange workflow. This is the one we're expanding. This is where we started. You saw the other things that we're doing in the PowerPoint. They'll be incorporated into here along with the expanded workflows and workflow definitions. Specifications. There's some technical background, primarily links to other things. FHIR overview, developers introductions, data types, etc. So if you're going to this implementation guide, you say, wait a minute, I don't understand the data types. Well, you can click here and it goes right to the data type specification for FHIR. We have we're right now referencing something Da Vinci did on privacy and security. We're going to bring most of that specification into here and include the data principles that Gravity has developed as part of it. That'll be in the final implementation guide for publication. That's based on Ballot comments. We have must support missing data. Okay, how do I treat things that are labeled as must support? What do I have to do? Both as the originator of the data and as the consumer of the data. And also, what do I do if I don't have data when it says you have to? So this defines how to treat those two situations. And it will be expanded too, based on some feedback. The specifications themselves, we just did that. Downloads, I won't go through. Artifact index. This is basically the guts of the implementation guide. These are the profiles that we have created for the exchanges that we are documenting. These are examples, and we'll go through these. These are examples of those profiled resources. So a patient example, a questionnaire response example, an observation example, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we have some temporary value sets and code systems that were inherited at Ballot as part of the guide. These will not stay here. They're going into the supplement. So we haven't updated that. We left them in for reference inside while we're doing the updates, but they will go away from the guide. So if I go back to here and we say, fine, I'm going to do a referral. Well, there are two pieces to referral. There's the task that you give to somebody that says, hi, I want you to do this thing. There's the service request itself that says what I want you to do. And then ultimately there is the procedure that documents what was done. So going through these top to bottom, these are the observations coming out of the screening resource. So the questions and answers. This is the condition or the health concern that may get created based on the answers to the questions. So health concerns can be elevated to a problem on the problem list. This is the goal that's established, supports both personal goals and provider and patient established goals, the referral, what was done, how we track it, the consent that we exchange. We talked about consent. And then we have a group resource that allows us to go and establish a cohort of individuals that are important to an external agency. This might be a cohort of individuals that all have the same payer. And then finally, we have a separate observation resource that is not derived directly from an assessment tool, but is an observation that is created by an interaction between the patient and the provider, or the payer and the provider, or the community-based organization and the provider, or the patient. Sorry, I said payer, it should be payer and patient, payer and member. So these are the base resources or profiles. So if I go into the service request, for example, actually let's go into the task. This is the structure for a task. And this is true of all FHIR implementation guides. So it has the resource profile. It has some other information that can be in here that we have now put back into the specific elements. It has a formal view of the profile. It is a textual summary. It has what's called a differential table. These are the things the profile has done to the base resource. It has a snapshot table that shows the entire profiled resource, including all the things that we have done to it. So no base resource has much support in it. Okay, that doesn't happen in the base resource. No base resource has extensions. Those are things we do as part of profiling. And then it has another snapshot table that says, here are all the things you must support. And must support comes in two flavors. We've either put a flag on it to indicate you must support it, or it has it's called a cardinality that says you absolutely have to have one of these. You don't have a choice. In which case you have to support it. So if we look at the differential table, for example, we're saying you have to support the status. You have to support the reason that the task has that status. And remember, this is a way of coordinating information between the ordering environment and the performing environment, or at least the one that's going to go and pass it on to a performing environment, assuming there's a referring platform in here. You have to support the intent. In this case, we're fixing it to an order, order referral, order and intervention. You have to support priority. You have to support a code that basically says, hi, this is you're going to fulfill this. Okay, it's a type of task. It's a task to be fulfilled. We have a reference to a service request. That's the thing that says what you're going to have to do. We have who it's for. In this case, it would be a patient. Could be a group. Could be a related person. Okay, depending upon what was being requested to be done. We have the requester. We have the owner of the task. In other words, who's responsible for updating it? In this case, if we're going and pushing the task to a coordination platform, it's the coordination platform's job to update it. They'll be the owner. And then we have some outputs from it. So when this thing is completed, we may wind up just indicating through a text or code that it's been completed. We also may connect it to a resource, a procedure that says in a persistent way, here's what was done. I want you to go and get deal with the person's food insecurity. They went and they validated first if they were eligible for SNAP. They enrolled them in SNAP. Okay, those may be two different procedures coming back indicating what was done. I think that's basically it. I'm going to stop for questions. I know this is getting way down in the weeds, but this is what the implementation guide is, down in the weeds. Questions? Okay. Where these things reference value sets, and I will go now, I'll go back here. I'm going to go over to the, let's see, we'll go to the condition base. This is a health concern. This can either be created manually or created automatically coming out of an assessment tool. We're doing things like saying fine. We've added an extension called the asserter. Who's asserting the fact that this condition exists? We've added a category that says this is an SDOH. It's a requirement, okay, for use in this implementation guide. We have a default in the code system, which is SNOMED, but we're also saying this can be coded as ICD-10. Now, if you're going to code it with both, the way we do it is those two codes should be reflective of each other. It's coded in a codable concept. One of the coding, a codable concept is a construct that says I can have more than one code system that has the same representation of a meaning, but they're in two different code systems. So that CT can code it and ICD-10 can code it. And if I'm doing procedures, I may have it as HCPCS and I may have it as Summit CT. Okay, so basically I have equivalents inside of that codable concept. One of the codes is required to be SNOMED. The other code, if it exists, is ICD-10. So that's specifying that if you're going to add a second coding, then it has to be ICD-10. This has when that refers to the subject. Let's see, here we have the, and we're going to, and here's what we're saying. For that ICD-10 code, we're going to bind it to what will become an SDOH value set for ICD-10-CM. And that will have all of the codes that are relevant to all of the categories that we're working on. Right now, it's just going to be a reference to ICD-10-CM, and that's it. But over time, this will become the superset of all of them. And the category will decide which of these codes are relevant to this instance of the resource. And then we have things related to, who recorded it, who's asserting it, the evidence, linking it back to the survey, linking it to something else. So any questions? Okay, I'm going to do one last thing. This is the prototype of our reference implementation. When you wind up with these kinds of detailed specifications, the question is, how do you actually make sure they're working? How do you actually make sure they do what we think they're going to do in practice? How do we test another side to make sure that we're exchanging things and understand the syntax and the semantics? So what we do is we create what's called a reference implementation. And what that reference implementation does is it provides a user experience, a user interface that allows us to go and set the parameters that are being communicated. In other words, what observations were made? What are the problems on the problem list or the health concerns? What are the goals? And so what this does, it sets up an environment. This is what we tested, by the way. It's a prototype for what we tested on the Connexathon. So here's a patient that was selected. You can select them from all patients. Here is the risk assessments that were performed. Prepare, help to spell right. We haven't gone back and fixed the prototype. This is really intended to go and help the developers determine what they need to do. We just did 100 vital signs. Okay, well, let's see what we got. Here's when it was administered. Here, there was a health concern that came out of it. Here are the question and answer pairs coming from it. One of those was a health concern. Okay, risk of food insecurity. Indicates it's new. Well, one of the things we can do is promote that to a problem on the problem list. Well, let's do that. So we're confirming that this should go onto the problem list. And now it is no longer a health concern. And we have two ways of closing out health concerns. We can mark them as resolved. 3, we can remove them because they shouldn't have been there. We can mark them as resolved. We can promote them to a problem. In this case, we promoted it to a problem. We'll look at the problem list. Now it's there on the problem list. At this point, we can add goals. We can add interventions. We can mark them as closed. Well, let's go and add a goal. So what we're going to do is we're going to select it from the category of food insecurity. We're going to have the goal of food security. We're going to add a text. And remember, this is just a prototype, so these are the code under it's relatively limited. It's on a particular date. It was added by the person who's currently documenting or will be, and we added it as a goal. And now we have a goal that we've added to the list of other goals that we have. Okay? We can take an action step. For example, we can create a referral or an intervention. And we can do so by doing 2 things. We can indicate a name for it. We can select the category, food insecurity. We can do a request, provision for food. We can indicate the urgency of it. We can select how long this request should remain out there. So this is in the past, in this demonstration. We can select problems from the problem list. We'll go and indicate it. In this case, I'm going to select 2 and make a mistake. Let's see, can I do that right now? Okay, food insecurity. I'm going to identify and connect patient to food resources. I believe if I make a mistake and select the second one, I can delete that back off. Come on. Well, yes, I can delete that off. I can indicate who I'm going to refer it to. There's a list that'll be, if it is in a reference implementation. I can either link or create a consent resource. And ultimately, am I missing anything here? I don't believe so. And then yes, I am. I have to select a resource or create it. And then I can go and create that. And at that point, it shows that I've sent it over to coordination platform, which is what I picked. And it's now on my active request list. And so I can maintain that. And this will start to synchronize with the other platform as that task and that task gets updated. So these are the things that we are building into the reference implementation to test the implementation guide pieces that we just walked you through. I think we have 1 minute left. Any questions?
Hey, Bob, this is Linnell. There was a question in the chat about which HL7 work group is going through the balloting for this.
This is being balloted under patient care. Okay, they are the, well, to be very careful. Patient care is the sponsoring work group. They're the ones that approve the ballot dispositions. We have a call on Wednesday, which is also a patient care call, where we go through these the implementation guide and do the ballot reconciliation. Now, we've done it for everything except the patient stories, which are under development. So we've already gone through all of them. They've already put in block votes, and they've all been approved. I believe we have 29 of the 227 comments left that are related to the patient stories. They will be provided with dispositions as we rewrite the patient stories based on their feedback and the expanded scope. On the
IG supplemental guide, that Excel file, where was that posted somewhere on Confluence?
Yeah, it's also out on the track, Connectathon track, and I think that's the only place it is. It's a draft. It will be eventually pointed to directly by the implementation guide. Okay.
Thank you. So currently, if you find it on the Connectathon, great, thanks.
Yep. Any other questions before we adjourn? Okay, I want to thank everyone for hanging in there, going through some incredibly technical detail, and we hope you have a great day. Take care.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks very much, Bob. It was really good to see this walked through. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.